There are three areas that I hope in these three workshops we're going to talk about and deepen our awareness of. Trauma. The word trauma is sort of thrown around the world. It became a word, the in word. Oh, it's trauma. We're dealing with trauma. But understanding the tiefkeit of trauma and how it affects and what it does to a human being and what should be our expectations of a person who's suffering with trauma, that I discover most people don't really understand. And my experience has been kaseda, that if we don't chap the sugya deeply, that all our children are going through of what exactly is trauma. We understand it's trauma, we got that. But what does it mean, Lamaisa? And how does it affect them? So if we don't grasp that, I feel, on a very, very deep level, where we live with them and feel for them and have compassion for them, then it inevitably affects how we deal with them. Our impatience displays itself, our frustrations displays itself. We all have, a feeling somewhere inside. I think Rabbi Gedalia mentioned before, if you come here because you're hoping, we're longing for our children to return. We want to fix them and get on with it. And that impatience pushes us forward and in fact is exactly counterproductive to what we want to achieve. So I wanted to take us on a journey. I thought it would be helpful if we went on a journey of deeply understanding what trauma means, and more importantly, what trauma means to us and to our children. At the same time, I would like to add that this olam sitting here, most of us here have experienced trauma too. We're all trauma sufferers to one degree or another. When you see your precious jewel of a child struggling, that itself is a traumatic experience. So I'd like to suggest that we take this material that we're going to talk about in these next day or two, but apply it to yourself too. Think about where you're struggling. Think about what happens with you. Because honestly, I believe that all of us, to a degree or another, and I see it when I work with parents and families, we're all struggling. We're all traumatized. The context within which we're looking at the specific sugya of trauma, and then we'll deepen our awareness of impulse disorder, of what it is and why it's so difficult and how to deal with it, will bring us to understanding, I hope, how to operate our families better, how to relate to each other more positively, with more love, more kindness, more understanding, more patience. That's the goal of these three workshops. Now, the specific traumas that we're talking about, we have to remember, are in a context that I believe we in Klal Yisrael have enormous amount of trauma that we're dealing with still. We all have, we can't deny the reality that the Holocaust traumas, the variety of different, more specifically the two types of Holocaust traumas, the either over-smothering, over-controlling, over-protecting traumatic reaction, or the disconnected, we don't love, we don't kiss, we don't emotionally connect. Those traumas that came out of the Holocaust are still there. Let's not fool ourselves. When I began my work 32 years ago, of course I was dealing with survivors and children of survivors all the time. Today we're looking at third and fourth generation who are also suffering with those same traumas globally and unaware that they're even suffering from trauma. So we have a context of both Holocaust trauma around us as part of the fabric of our society, and the much worse, more insidious trauma is, unfortunately, and I don't mean this as an attack or critique, but as a reflection of a process that's still unfolding, which is the traumas caused by the school systems that we have our children in today, recognizing that the reality, if we would interview random samples of 12th grade graduating kids, of course we have to add in the kids who never made it to 12th grade, so we'd have to randomly sample children that started in primary and take a look at them 12 years later. And if we'd ask those children, was your experience a positive one, or are you glad you're finished with it? Are you glad it's over? Do you look back fondly, or are you glad it's done? And when I do this kind of research, shockingly, about 80% of the kids are glad it's done. They're glad they're finished. There's about maybe 20% of the kids overall in the entire yeshivische Hasidische system that feel they did well and are happy about what happened to them during their journey through the system. 80% of them suffer through the system very badly, and there's another type of insidious, undiagnosed trauma that they struggle with. So in the background of the specifics of the children that we're our children who go through specific problems and issues and struggles, in the background there's a fabric of trauma which is both the Holocaust trauma and the school system trauma, if you want. Because the system that we have today is a system that was designed to recover from the Holocaust. It's a recovery system, and rightly so. It's a system where the Meisters HaTorah matter more than the children in the Meisters. That was a recovery, that's survival. But that's not continuity. That doesn't last, that doesn't keep things going. And such a system, inevitably, I hope, will keep unfolding and become more sensitive to the children in where it is a child-centered system, which it is not today. It is not a system that's focused on the individual child. It's focused on the individual Mossad being successful. So in the background of all the specific traumas, we have children who are living in a fabric of trauma to begin with. So to me it's so crucial that we should grasp and understand, so what is trauma? How does it affect? So that the goal of this, I hope, is that we will walk away with an amazing depth of compassion and understanding for our children and be able to speak to them and interact with them differently, because we'll understand on a much deeper level where they're coming from. Now I just want to say a quick disclaimer before we continue, giving them time to set this up. You nearly there? Good. So I want to say the following. I understand that there are many, or I don't know how many, I have no clue, but I know there are numbers of people sitting here who've done Regis course, is that right? Am I correct about that? Who know something about, must have learned a lot about some of the material we're going to speak about today. So there are those who have more knowledge and those who have less. I'm assuming that some people have very primitive knowledge or understanding of exactly how trauma works. And for others, you may have much more information and knowledge already, which may make some of this sound a little bit, boring to you. I hope not. I'd like to say the following. Over the years, I consistently went to different trainings. I always was doing training. By the way, I'm just filling in until they're finished. This is all like just so we don't get lost. I went to many trainings over the years, constantly, and as I progressed in my own training, I became more and more disappointed as I went to trainings from world experts and professionals who essentially, basically almost everything that was there I knew. Everything they were saying I knew, and I found it very frustrating to spend the time and the money to go and listen to stuff that I basically knew already. It was disappointing. Then one day, I was driving back from Washington. I went to a workshop on sexual abuse treatment. And I found that basically everything there I knew. And it was a long drive back in the snow. I wasn't very happy about it at all. And then it occurred to me that something one of my clients had once said to me, that every time I go to a conference, go to a workshop or a training, my confidence in what I do rises. And that's if I go to a conference and I'm hearing an expert saying stuff that basically I know, well, that should give you confidence. That should give you an inner strength of security in yourself. So I'm hoping that everyone will nosh something from what we're going to be doing over these these 3 workshops, and something to take home, change your life, and be valuable. If you take one nugget home that could change your life, then this whole thing is kedai worth it, in my opinion. So, an in-depth understanding of trauma, impulse disorder, and family responsibility. Let's start at the beginning. This is where I started, was understanding the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the American Psychiatric Association. What's their definition of trauma? And it's important because the relevance to us, often you send your children for treatment, and you need to send your children for treatment to people who understand how to adapt and understand the nature of trauma to our community. Because if it's not going to work, you send them to rehabs and programs where they're going to go by the book, and the book is not exactly fine-tuned to our world. Let's take a look. Traumatic events, it says, are defined as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Now, for most of our kids, what they look at as sexual violence, even with the cases of molestation that happen to our children, and sexual abuse, do not qualify as being violence. The kids are not exposed to near-death experiences. So right away, you start off, the whole premise of trauma, when you interact with the secular treatment world, is suspect, because they look at us and they don't see that our kids as being traumatized. They don't begin to understand what it is, because it doesn't qualify as having exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Let's go further. Here's another definition. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions may include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So the long-term reactions happen to be true for the things happening to our children. But again, when we talk about our children being traumatized, we often struggle, if you look in the books and the literature, of what they define as trauma, it doesn't seem to fit. This is the problem we were facing year after year, trying to understand how to relate to what's happened to our children. Why is that called trauma? Why are they having those reactions? When it fails, as you can see, it is not a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. There are levels. Okay? There are levels on which horrible events impact our lives and cause a traumatic reaction. The traumatic reaction is where I'm thrown into a state of fight, flight, or freeze uncontrollably. I'm gone. I'm dissociated. I'm disconnected. I'm offline. That experience, according to the way they define it, is probably not true for almost all of our children. So when we start talking about they're traumatized, and you look in books and literature, it's very difficult to see exactly what we're talking about in terms of our children. And I've had countless parents who have sincerely tried to grasp or understand how is whatever's going on with my child, how is that called trauma? Because if you look in the books, it doesn't fit. So you become skeptical of what is all this trauma talk. Maybe it's all nonsense, they're making it up, and my kids aren't traumatized, and they just need svei pech, and let's get on with it.